It is Wales week. The dreaded Six Nations hiatus is over, and all eyes now turn to the Aviva Stadium on Friday night. That game for Ireland against Wales starts off a weekend that sees a fairly mouth-watering Saturday with France putting their Grand Slam aspirations on the line against Scotland at Murrayfield, followed by Italy targeting a first ever win over a beleaguered England in Rome later in the day. We will talk about all that on tonight's episode of the Left Wing podcast, as well as potentially some provincial storylines after what was an interesting URC weekend, considering it was, as I said, a Six Nations hiatus. Will Slattery here with you, delighted to be joined, as always, by Luke Fitzgerald, fresh off the ski slopes of continental Europe. Luke, hello.
Hey, Will. Yeah, no, great little breakaway. Good to get the permission slip these days. I think I did very well. So, no, it was a great little break in the middle of the year.
And you don't have that goggle line, so you must have just gotten it just right. You know, people come back from a ski trip and for like 2 weeks they have this marker on the right. So fair play. You obviously nailed that part of it.
Doused myself in cream. Yeah.
Also, delighted to be joined by Ruaidhri O'Connor. And Rud, we've really gotten our pound of flesh as a company out of you today. You're on the Indo Sport podcast this morning, then off to the High Performance Centre to do the day job, and now back in for a left wing. We're making you work for it, Rud.
Best time of the year. You got to make it count. There's enough kind of quiet weeks, so you may as well enjoy the international weekends.
This has been a brilliant Six Nations for storylines. I like. Maybe I say this every year, but I don't think I do. I just feel like this has really been action packed, especially from an Irish perspective. That's why tonight I actually want to talk a bit about some of the other teams as well, because it's been so, obviously we're an Irish podcast, but it feels like there's been so much Irish news and narratives to break down that there's a couple of other teams and kind of things I'd like to explore. But first, our rugby coverage on the left wing is sponsored by Energia. Energia sponsors rugby in Ireland at all levels, at grassroots with the Energia AIL, and is official energy partner to Leinster, Connacht and the Irish men's and women's teams. To learn more about Energia's rugby partnerships and find out about their exclusive home energy offer for rugby fans, you can visit energia.ie/rugby. Guys, I was saying to you beforehand, we might just go through the table by way of kind of teeing up the talking points, because France, to start with them, Rud, our team we haven't really discussed a huge amount in the show since week one, when it was kind of, I suppose, the be all and end all from an Irish perspective. Andy Farrell gave that, kind of eyebrow raising post-match press conference about the lack of intent, and we discussed the French performance in the night, and then obviously moved on to Ireland and have been following Ireland fairly closely since. But they stood atop the table, 15 points out of 15, 3 wins out of 3. They beat Ireland 36-14 in the Stade de France on that Thursday, followed that up with a 54-12 win over Wales and a 33-8 win over Italy. And in those 3 games, they led Ireland 22-0, they led Wales 19-0 and Italy 19-0 as well. So they've kind of put all those games to bed pretty early. Not only that, but playing scintillating rugby. Are France as kind of far ahead for you from the chasing pack as they've appeared in the first 3 weeks? Is it just how the fixtures have fallen and a good run of form, and they kind of finish with 2 toughish games on paper, like with Scotland and then an England team who I suppose are a little more in flux? But what's your read on them? Are they as good as they've looked so far in this championship, do you think?
Oh, I think every bit of it. Yeah, I don't think it's a vintage championship across the board in that, Ireland are in a little bit of a rebuild and certainly didn't arrive into the tournament in great nick in terms of massive injury list, bad November, at a point of a kind of a World Cup cycle. Randy Farrell's putting together a team still. England, we thought were going to be the main threat, and they haven't delivered at all. And we'll get on to them. And so France have just gone about their business really, really well, put the teams to the sword that they've had to put to the sword, done it in thrilling style. While they've scored tries for fun, but they've also been very stingy at, in terms of their defence as well. Like Italy threw the kitchen sink at them, but just couldn't land a blow really. All the constituent parts of that French setup between the Sean Edwards defence, Vlock Cilliers, their kicking coach, is really influential there. The, Galtier, what he did last year in terms of bringing a second string to New Zealand, blooding a whole load of kind of new faces, having, done the same not that long ago, it seems like. And then after November, dropping, the big storyline going into the Ireland game was he dropped the 3 players who captained the team in November. Aldreet, the 2 players who captained the team in November, and Damien Penaud, the record try scorer. So Gael Ficou, Aldreet and Penaud were left out, and they haven't missed them one bit. And the thing is that they're all young enough that if they need them, they'll come back in. Like Cameron Waukie's being called back up to the squad today. Like, what a player to bring back in, hungry, having been left out of the first 3 games of the Six Nations. And the depth they're building, they're drawing from the best, most competitive league there is. They're well coached. They're in good condition. They're a nice age profile. They've got probably the best player in the world in Antoine Dupont. Sorry, not probably. I don't know why I'm caveating that. The best player in the world in Antoine Dupont. They're in ridiculous nick, and they should go on to win this tournament, even though their probably two toughest games are ahead of them still, and we'll see if they tighten up. But they're full value for their 4-point lead ahead of Scotland. They've been the best team in this tournament by a mile so far.
Yeah, hard to argue with anything you said there. It's funny, like they should really have probably could be going for back-to-back slams as well. Like you look back to the England game they lost last year at Twickenham, and we discussed it at length at the time, just how wasteful they were. And I suppose that's the other side of the coin, Luke, because sometimes, like, when they play like they have in the first 3 weeks, you're thinking, or I'm thinking, sorry, like, how do they not win this tournament every year? Or certainly in the last couple of years with the squad they've had and with Dupont. I know he missed in 2024 and Ireland really took advantage of it that year. But what have you made of how well they've been playing?
France have looked very strong. Very hard to argue with a lot of what Rudd said. But I do think there's a few banana skins left for them in this championship. I think kind of similar to Ireland after the first week, I kind of felt like there was still a big performance in this team. I think there's a performance in this English team too. And I just hope they save it for that last one. And Scotland are, they're tricky. They are a tricky team to play against. Look, they've thrown away some games. That New Zealand one, don't know how they lost that one at the end in November. Really should have closed that one out. So they're tricky at home. They're difficult and they're fit. They're strong. They're playing with a bit of confidence. If they get their tails up, they're hard to stop. But France should have too much. They should have too much power for them. They should have maybe a little bit too much of the wing. I do think that the Scottish wingers are very, very dangerous. Really, really dangerous. I really like the look of them. But there's another level. There's another gear. Like Bielbury is another level, isn't he? Look, I'm watching them closely over the next couple of weeks. I feel like there's a slip up in them. Look, I still think they'll win the championship, but I'm not convinced that they're going to win the last 2 games. I think they've looked pretty strong, but who've they played against really? And Ireland were horrific. So I'd be cautious about thinking they're kind of running away with things. These are their real tests, I think. Ireland should have been a real test, but numbers down, low in confidence, I think, from November. Some poor selections, I think. I'm not saying that with the benefit of hindsight. We did think a few of those selections, particularly 10, was probably a mistake. Watching them closely over the next couple of weeks, I feel like there's a slip up in them.
Yeah, well, if you look at the permutations, like if they beat Scotland, they've probably won the championship regardless of what happens against England. If they lose to Scotland, that would mean Scotland would then probably have to go to Ireland and obviously win that in order to win the championship. So it would be a pretty tall order to see them not winning it. But yeah, as you say, the slam is hard won. Rudd, I just want to throw a few stats at you. Ross Hamilton, the rugby analyst on Twitter, is good man for stats. He put together a few that kind of illustrate kind of the rugby France have been playing versus, I suppose, other teams and the way they go about their business. Tries scored from their own half in the Six Nations. France have 8, everyone else has 5. Tries scored from kick return. France have 8, everyone else has 3. Tries on first phase. France have 9, everyone else has 10. So in kind of metrics of kind of thrilling, attacking rugby, like France seem to be head and shoulders above everybody else, which would kind of marry to the eye test of what it's felt like to watch them the first 3 rounds.
Yeah, they've been ahead of the curve, haven't they? They're not. They're dangerous from anywhere in the pitch, and it doesn't seem to take an awful lot out of them to score a try. Whereas with other teams, like England, punched themselves out in Twickenham against Ireland, going through 17 phases in the Irish 22 in the first 10 minutes, and that level of effort to come away with nothing. Whereas with France, it's like 2 passes and Bielbury or Adesogbe are just gone, and it just takes so little out of them in terms of the team effort. Their forwards can just take a breather, take 2 minutes as the conversion's been taken, and then they go again. So they have that all-court game. They keep the ball alive. They stay on their feet in contact. They're not looking for breakdowns. I think they're quite well built for this, the way the game has been played at the moment in terms of those aerial contests. Like the big decision, one of the big decisions Galtier made was to go for Adesogbe ahead of Damien Penaud, and that was because Adesogbe is known within the top 14 as being one of the best aerial players in the league. So they're well set for this game. Their attitude towards turnover or towards kind of the transition is so refreshing and exciting. they get the ball and it's headed up straight away. Where's the space? Whether it's Dupont, whether it's Ramos, whether it's Jalabert, they're looking for that space straight away. And we saw it in the opening minutes, in the opening seconds in Paris when they just went left. And I think it was the centre bounced Gary Ringrose, and suddenly Biel Barret was away, and it was almost a try straight away off. It was Deporter. And, they were almost gone out in the first couple of seconds. And, they've lost their starting centres from that night, and they've just brought in two fairly unheralded young players, and they've just come in and it's been seamless. And now they have even more options to play with. So they've it hasn't knocked much out of them. Even losing Jalabert in the build up to the Italy game, they slotted Ramos in, and it wasn't perfect. And you wouldn't necessarily want Ramos starting at 10 in the World Cup final, but they've Ntamack to come back in there. So they have they've depth, but when they lose players, that kind of ability to score from anywhere, it doesn't seem to diminish. So they're thrilling to watch as a result, but they're also conserving energy as they do it, because they're not having to go through the countless rucks that other teams are going through to try and score.
Yeah,
and they're ruthless as well, Will. I mean, just to tie in on that point, I think the Ramos point is maybe slightly undersold in that he's so good off the tee. It makes some difference. You think about even Ireland against England, and hard to be critical, but I'm going to be. If the kick, if Crowley kicks a little bit better, the game. There was a period in that game where they had no right to be in the game once Ireland kind of been blowing them away. When they got the 2 tries, you're kind of saying, "Oh, if they get one more here, they're in the game." Whereas France, I just think they're kind of motoring ahead of you there, and that's another thing that gives your pack a breather as well. You can take France have, get to, give away a try or two and still be kind of, have all the points they should have after all the pressure that they kind of put on you. And there's a lot to be said for that. Even just the mental space that it gives you, a little bit of a, they get to play a bit free if they deliver early. And in fairness, they've been delivering, they've been delivering, they've been ruthless, but they do get to take a break in a game, which actually is helpful. Yeah, just thought I'd add that in.
Yeah, I agree with you on Ramos. Yeah. Sorry.
That must be cultural, guys. The top 14, there's just obviously no tolerance for missed kicks, or very little tolerance for missed kicks. They've, at URC level, we've seen the Irish 10s across the board just haven't been at anywhere near the level of the French goal kickers. We saw it in Bayonne, Leinster. Like, the reason Bayonne were in that game so close, they kicked their goals. La Rochelle, Garrick off the corner, from wide out. Every 5 was turned into 7. They were ruthless. Cass were ruthless against Munster. Munster's kicking let them down. They lost that game. I don't know, is it because the number of teams they're pulling from and the level of kickers that are in that league? Obviously, the 14 teams to choose from in top flight, plus the 16, isn't it, in Pro D2? So there's a lot more players, obviously, and they're all driving each other to higher standards, but there seems to be a lower threshold for missed kicks and a higher standard of goal kicking in France right now.
Yeah, where I think it comes from, if you just watch the top 14, teams just kick for the post a lot more than they do in the URC and say the Gallagher Premiership. It's just you often see 3-3, 6-6, 9. They often go punch per punch like that. Whereas definitely from an Irish perspective, we've noticed a trend for a long time. Just much more corner focused. Remember a couple of years ago, it was the week before the Champions Cup final in 2024. Leinster played in Ulster and they had to win to top the table. And I think they were 6 points up. And they went to the corner to kill the game off instead of Harry Byrne kicking a 3. In the top 14, that's going to the post every day of the week. And I think they're getting more reps as well, as you say, they're pulling for more players. But I just generally think they're getting more reps under pressure as well, which has to help. I think as well, because you're right, there's so many good goal kickers. Legorek catches the eye, as Luke mentioned. Ramos is unbelievable off the deck, as well as being a great player as well. So yeah, I think it's a good point actually. But Ruud, it's funny you mentioned Damien Penaud earlier. It's funny, I was watching some of Bordeaux Poe last night, and watching him in the kind of the Dirt Trackers game, during the Six Nations window. At half-time of France-South Africa in November, France were 14-13 ahead. Penaud had scored his 39th and 40 in international tries. And if you told anyone then that, 2-3 months later, he'd be kicking his heels in a top 14 game when all the stars are in the stand watching on. Adesogbe was at the game, sitting in the stand, watching his home team play against Penaud, the fella he's replacing. As you said, that call has just proven a masterstroke, or it's certainly paid off. Penaud's an unbelievable player, but Adesogbe's been unbelievable. But so much has changed since then. It's funny, he was one one of the stars in world rugby 3 months ago, and now he's not even in his international squad.
Yeah, and like what a kick up the hole it is for him to go and fix the things that he's like. I'm sure he's got a list of things that he needs to fix. So he goes away, he fixes them. Aldri takes a Six Nations off, gets La Rochelle up the table, gets his performances right. Suddenly you have one of the best number 8s in the world, and arguably the greatest winger in French rugby history. Leading Bordeaux to potentially a Champions Cup, and then you go to the summer. Well, the summer he'd probably be a dummy squad, but certainly in November you're coming into that World Cup next year, and you've got a reaction because everyone will want to go to that tournament. So, you're your record try scorer, and you're watching these Six Nations games on TV. There's a message there of what you want to fix. You got to go fix it if you want to get back in the team, and then like that's competition, and like that's the depth that Ireland can only dream of having. Players of that quality. Like Ireland's a completely different model, a completely different system. We can't compare them really, but like South Africa can do that. They can, bring players in from other countries, other leagues, who are almost, interchangeable. And the response from the player that's been left out is, that's what Roger Erasmus is looking for. And England have that potentially. New Zealand have that. And it's a luxury really that Ireland and the smaller nations really can't afford. Like Andy Farrell's not in a position to really be able to cast out anyone like that. And really, you look at the URC at the weekend. It's not like there's someone, from an Irish point of view, who's tearing up trees in the URC level that you're looking to get back in. So it's a bit of a flex. And you think by the time the World Cup rolls around, these players will be able to plug back in, having they know what they're missing out on. Potentially, they're missing out on a Grand Slam. They don't happen very often in players' careers, and that's only going to make them hungrier. Obviously, it could reverse it, and they lose to Scotland, and suddenly there's a bit of a revolt, and it can lead to dissatisfaction and squad disharmony, and maybe some of these players will never forgive Galtier for leaving them out. But I would say that the reverse will happen, that those players will double down and try and get back into that squad as much as they can, and suddenly you'll have a proper scrap between really high quality players, and it just drives standards.
Can I add in on that as well? Because I think one thing I would say is, I think the looseout situation is probably a bit extreme, right? But you look at what happened on the wings in Twickenham. We brought in a Lion back into the matchday squad. One of our best players was kind of relatively unproven at international level in Balakoon. And I think sometimes I wonder, is it a mindset thing? France have always I think they're relatively inconsistent for some of the great teams that they've had, and some poor coaching along the way, but they do seem to chop and change a bit more. They're more comfortable doing that. And I do wonder, is the Irish psyche just a little bit different in that, we have brought in some players now, and they've actually been outstanding for us and really, really key. They look like, Balakoon looks like, if he can produce and stay fit what he produced in Twickenham, he becomes a seriously important player for you. But you've also got Mac Hansen, who's a Lion sitting at home. You know what I mean? James Lowe will come back in. Now he's out for a while as well, but you know what I mean? There's like, all of a sudden you're kind of going, actually, are things that bad? Like, I thought Calvin Nash had played some nice rugby when he was in the team there. He's had a lot of injury problems and stuff. So I don't know. So sometimes I do think we probably have a bit more in there than we reckon, And then you've got, let's think about that fullback, Stockdale can't get in the team. He's been outstanding in the URC. You've got Keenan there on the wings, waiting to go in. So I don't know. So we might actually have quite a bit of depth, Ruds, all of a sudden. Versus, I'm not saying it's the same as France. I'm just saying, I do wonder. I suppose the observation I'm making is around our mindset versus, say, some of the other teams where they kind of look. They always have more resources, but I wonder, do we use our resources? Do we think of our resources the same way that they do as well, in terms of bringing them in and give them opportunity?
I think it's a good point.
Is there anything?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I do think I think as an Irish psyche, we do like to pick our best, our kind of the perceived best team every week as much as possible. And if there's changes to that, it's seen as like fairly significant. Road, like if there's a change made, it's like X is dropped. It's a big move. It's not like, I feel like I feel like we kind of think about things a very, not a rigid way, but we have a way of doing things in Ireland. Like even the pathway to the team, like I mentioned like 2 weeks ago about like Sam Prendergast skipped a perceived rung on the ladder maybe of Champions Cup rugby. It was like URC to international. And that definitely got people's attention when he wasn't going well. It's like, oh, well, he didn't go through the proper steps, the traditional steps that we see in Ireland. And I know it's worked for Ireland for the most part, but I do feel like maybe we are kind of rigid thinkers. And I'm included, like, obviously I do this show every week. I definitely am guilty of, I think about, I suppose, things a certain way is how things ought to look in terms of a progression of a player. And if it goes outside of that, I'm a little like, is that what should be happening?
Can I also add just briefly, Rhodes, just because it's actually the same point, but just in the forwards, if you think about it as well, you've got a Dogbu now, you've got Izuchuku, looks like he's, top quality operator at this level, I think. Timoney's older now, but he's obviously, he looks quality as well. I like Bryn Ward. All of a sudden you're kind of going, is it actually that bad? I didn't think Clarkson was that bad. I don't think McCarthy, McCarthy could well be ahead of Porter, who was kind of, neck and neck with Ellis Genge for starting hooker or for starting loosehead for the Lions, So I don't know. Just it's interesting. Maybe it's not as bad as we think it was. I was panicking as well. I won't lie. I'm not saying that I was different or anything like that.
Yeah, I did a piece, or an article that hasn't been published yet that was planned for last weekend, but it's been pushed on till after the Six Nations. But I actually went and did the depth chart across every position, and it's pretty healthy in a lot of areas. I think the age profile in the midfield is a bit worrying. I think 10, there's 4 options there, but there's a little bit of a concern as to whether any of them are as high quality as you'd like them to be. Loosehead, I think, like, Lockman's come in and he's been fine, but I think you wouldn't want to be going to him if it's a World Cup. You want those 2 players coming back, McCarthy and Boyle, and like they look like real prospects, but they're still very, very inexperienced. Tight head, your top 2 options are over 34. Sorry, I think Furlong might be 33, but they're in the kind of upper echelons of the 30s, and that's a bit of a concern. So there's certain areas, but there's other areas, as you've mentioned, that are really healthy. And what I think Farrell does is a very different approach to Galtier. He just, because he's lived his entire life in professional sport, he knows the injuries are going to come and it's going to happen. So he doesn't force the issue. He's never going to leave the entire all essentially contracted players at home for a summer tour in the way Galtier would, and just bring a young squad down to an emerging Ireland squad down to France or to New Zealand and Australia to play in the Nations Championship. And I don't think he should. I don't think Ireland's ever going to have the depth where you can do that. But he knows that at some stage the door was going to open for a Balogun, who, in fairness, he picked against South Africa in 2022. He obviously brought Henshaw in for the first half of this week, even though he's probably not going to be involved at the weekend. So he's trying to build that club mentality while also trying to build competition. But he's allowed the injuries to do the work for him, which I think kind of came back to bite them a little bit at the World Cup, where I think Keenan was. They got away with one with Keenan because they didn't really develop an alternative in the entire 2023 cycle. They've now got 3. They've got Osborne can play there, Hansen can play there. You can play Hansen if you want to play a certain way. You play Keenan, you want to play a certain way. You've got Osborne if you want to play a certain way. Osborne is a great bench option. So there is within the squad, and I think a lot of the alarm after the first weekend was a little bit overblown because that A squad was quite weak. Like Ireland's, the senior team were missing 10 or 11. He kept about 35 in camp, so they weren't released. And when you're down to the kind of outside the top 45 players in Ireland, you're never going to be able to compete with the next tier down in England where there's just more players. So, they've given a Dogbo cap. They need him to get fitter, apparently. So that's he's gone back to Munster with that message, and he's got a taste of it now. Bryn Ward might get capped on Friday. He'll go back with a kind of a taste of what it takes to be an international player. And then other players like, say, McCluskey's now a senior leader in the squad, having been a bit part player for a decade. So there's definitely, it's a healthier spot than it was. And if you get those 9 or 10 injured players back for the summer, for example, that squad's going to be interesting. Someone good is going to not make it. Now we know there'll be injuries, but they're definitely in a better spot in that scenario. Scrum half is another area I think where Gibson Park's so far ahead of everyone else. So there's depth in a lot of areas, but there's still a couple of key positions where they could do it, find them 1 or 2 more.
Now, we definitely jumped ahead and went to Ireland a little early, but we'll class that as kind of an Irish interlude, and we'll pick up Ireland, in properly in a few minutes. But Luke, you mentioned Scotland earlier. Obviously, their game against France is the game of the weekend, and Scotland, their tournament has been such a classic Scotland tournament. Like, they start off with that really poor defeat to Italy, torrential rain, but they were 12-0 down before the rain really even started, so they had already started very poorly. Then, as has become almost an annual tradition, they produced their great performance of the year against England. Gregor Townsend actually did a funny interview afterwards when he was like, "Oh, some people are saying it's a negative. Like, I think it's a great thing we play our best rugby against England." It's like, well, you would say that, obviously. Like, you're not going to say it's a bad thing. But for me, that win almost made me more frustrated with his reign, because they are so good against England. It's like, well, why can't they produce it more regularly? And then the Wales game was a great game of rugby. Great to see Wales put up a good fight after their first 2 games. But even the fact that Scotland were 12 points down at one stage and required that kick off try, catching them napping to kind of get back in the game, said a lot as well. So they're in an interesting place. They have 2 very tough games. They have France home and then obviously Ireland away to finish things off. What's your view on Scotland after 3 rounds?
Probably the same as pre-tournament. They're a banana skin team, but I don't think they just cannot find that consistency. Haven't been able to do it. Got some special players, got some good threat. I think they're dangerous out wide, but I think if you produce a tidy performance against Scotland, I think more often than not you come out on top. If you get drawn into one of these kind of basketball style games with them, where it's loose, where it's fast, I think they can be dangerous and they can hurt you. But I don't think Ireland will get drawn into that. And I don't know if France could get drawn into that game against them, and it could get ugly. But that is not how I would play. That's not how I would train this French team to play against Scotland. I would be thinking, big set pieces, controlled. Like, particularly if you're kicking to them, I would make sure the ball is fairly, make sure you have good kick chase, make sure you're really accurate. And I think they've got all the tools to do that, So, for me, the mindset for them has got to be win collisions against Scotland, win the breakdowns, kick really well against them. And I think they'll be fine. But can the French do that for 80 minutes against them, And if they're not as ruthless as they have been with the other teams and they get a bit carried away with thinking they're great, they could get hurt up there. So it's a great game on the weekend. I can't wait to watch it. I hope it's one of those games where France are a little bit loose and they let Scotland in, and it's a tight one. But I don't think either France or Ireland should do that against them. Nor England. England, for whatever reason, have got drawn into these back and forth kind of games with them, and that's why they've got hurt on a number of occasions. If you control it, if your pillars of your game are really good against them, I think more often than not you come out on top of Scotland. I just don't think they have the consistency over 80 or over the course of a tournament to be a consistent threat.
Yeah, I agree with you about kind of playing. If you don't get drawn into that kind of game, like Ireland never do. Ireland, when you think of Ireland-Scotland games in your head, like Ireland have controlled them for the most part. They haven't really given Scotland much of a sniff. In particular, like the last 2 games in Murrayfield, they've ended up winning by like well into the double digits, including the one in 2023 when Ireland had a number of injuries. Rudd, what's your view on Gregor Townsend's future? Like, no one in the history of the Six Nations has beaten England more times than Gregor Townsend, which is pretty crazy. Like, I think he's managed to coach against them 9 times and won 6 of them and drawn 1. Like, he is a great coach against England, and then unfortunately Scotland have to play other fixtures as well where he's not been quite as successful. He's lost all 11 games against Ireland, for instance, and there's no one can tell me the disparity between Ireland and England is as great as that would make it out to be. Like, for me, I think he needs to win one of the last 2 to be safe at coming back next year, because we've talked a lot about Ireland's World Cup draw. But Scotland have the same draw. If Scotland can beat Ireland, they have a great opportunity of going far in a tournament potentially when they haven't really been able to do that in a long, long time. So with Franco Smith waiting in the wings, who works with the bulk of the squad in Glasgow, they beat Toulouse earlier this year. And obviously there's been the Townsend to Newcastle link as well. I don't get the sense he's massively popular in Scotland, even though he's a Scottish rugby legend himself. I think they're as fed up with some of the inconsistencies that we are watching on. What's your sense of his future, or what do you think should happen to him if they do finish, say, with 2 defeats?
Yeah, 2 different things, aren't they? Like, I think he's probably overstayed a little bit. I think it takes a very special coach to stay in charge as long as he has, because and I mean, you got to remember he was Glasgow coach before that, so some of the players have been listening to him for, more than a decade now. So that's a very difficult thing to do. I think he's got a very good rugby brain. I think he's from the Joe Schmidt school. He's quite controlling. He's obviously fallen out with Russell and Stuart Hogg before him from time to time. And, at times I'm sure he was frustrated by the discipline of his own players, the off-field discipline as much as the on-field. I think history will probably judge him kindly, considering where Scotland were when he took over and some of the great days he's given them. But he hasn't been able to put together that tournament that really will cement his legacy. And his World Cups were a disaster, partly down to Ireland, really, but also, Japan didn't go well on both fronts. I just think it's probably too late in the cycle to change. I know Franco Smith is at Glasgow, so he's already coaching a lot of the players, and he has international experience. So that's a hoary old chestnut for Townsend to have this excellent coach sitting there. It's a bit like when Joe Schmidt was there and Declan Kidney was struggling. Like that's difficult for Townsend to deal with. And there is this question about, it's widely expected that he's and has been reported by that he has signed the deal to go to Newcastle, or certainly he's committed to go to Newcastle after the World Cup. So I don't see anything wrong with that necessarily, him kind of having one last dance with Scotland and heading off to a different job. The fact that he's consulting with them beforehand, even if it doesn't take away from his time with Scotland, it probably suggests or paints a picture of someone whose eye has been taken off the ball a little bit. So look, you're right. If he could beat France or Ireland or both, he will 100% be going to that World Cup with Scotland. My gut is that he probably will anyway. I don't think there's any great desire within the SRU to change. Our old friend David Nucifora is over there as kind of a acting performance director. He's someone who values cohesion and stability, and I think would respect what Townsend has to offer. Realistically, you've got two Nations Championship windows, a Six Nations, and then World Cup warm-ups before the World Cup. So to make a change at this point is risky. England, that we're going to come on to later, might have to do it if things go really badly in the next couple of weeks. But I don't think anyone's going to want to do that. And my gut will be that Townsend will still be in charge come the World Cup next year.
Yeah, that's my sense of it as well. I do think he is a good coach. Like, he won the URC with Glasgow. It's funny you said, like, Finn Russell, I don't know, as you said, they don't have the best relationship. He was his club coach with Glasgow and then has been his national coach since 2018. So I would love to know what Finn Russell thinks of him deep down. But his record, he's had enough good days with Scotland to show that he can coach a team well, particularly on the attacking side. But just even this championship alone, if they had beaten Italy, which I know Italy are an improving team, but like if they could have gone to Rome and won, they would have been like joint top with France. With hosting them in Murrayfield after a break week. Like, imagine the atmosphere in Murrayfield with that on the line. Like, that was there for them. That was there for them. And they laid an absolute egg and a half on the opening day. They deserved to lose to Italy. So, I don't have, too much sympathy, or I wouldn't put too much stock on that of being a narrative. But at the same time, it was there for them. And that was so frustrating. They opened with such a terrible performance.
Yeah, Italy were very good on the day, and the conditions were... they ended up chasing the game in atrocious, historically atrocious conditions, which was difficult for them. I'm not giving them a pass. Italy carved them open. Italy looked, had that, to use the word of the tournament, they had the intent, Lina going up and winning that ball. They brought it that day, and Scotland kind of slept-walked into the tournament and weren't ready for opening day. They weren't alone. Ireland weren't ready on opening day either mentally. And they're paying the price for it. They're playing catch up. Like they've done what they had to do since. They've 11 points on the board. They're 2 ahead of Ireland. They're in an unbelievably good position on paper, but I guess it's judging anyone 3 games in, you're waiting to see what happens in the next 2 weeks. Like if he goes and beats France the weekend, they're coming to Dublin like a train, and 11 in a row is 11, isn't it? 11 in a row is that record has to break at some stage. It's not going to last forever.
Nobody beats Gregor Townsend 12 times in a row, Rod. That's the old expression.
But you're not looking you don't want that to happen in a World Cup pool game. You'd almost rather it happen now. But I think Farrell wants to keep his foot on the Scottish throat. Dempsey's back, which I think is pretty important. I think he's a really important player for them, important ball carrier. It's well set up. It's in their hands to go and win this tournament, as unlikely as it seems. So we'll see how they go. It's hard to see it because of their record over the last decade or so. And if they did go and win it with 4 from 5, God, they've left a Grand Slam behind them. But they're not going to be complaining too much.
There's no chance they win the Six Nations, Rod. I'll burst that bubble there. Sad as it is to say, they had to beat Italy. Even if they were to beat France and beat Ireland, I still don't think they'd they'd finish ahead of France with bonus points. But
They need 5-0.
Yeah, they need to
5-0 and
they
then
need to hockey
it's unlikely.
Yeah, they need to hockey them. But yeah, look, we'll see. That's why we play the games. Set up to be a great game. Murrayfield. I think it's a 10-2 game on Saturday. France making the trip to Edinburgh. Now let's go back to Ireland after this break. Ireland Wales on Friday night. Luke, who would you start on the left wing? James Lowe injured. Thought Tommy O'Brien. Obviously, we touched on him at length last week. Thought he was brilliant off the bench. Not traditionally a left winger usually. Jacob Stockdale was retained, and I think there's talk that he might be in the frame to start as well. I think personally Tommy O'Brien played well enough that he should be rewarded. What's your reckoning? Do you think Stockdale might come back in? Would you like to see Stockdale get another chance? Because even though he didn't have a great night in Paris, I did feel kind of bad. He waited 5 years for a Six Nations start, had a poor night, and for him just to be kind of cast adrift and not get another opportunity but would be tough. But that's the cutthroat nature of the business as well. Who would you start?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm going O'Brien. I think he's more dangerous. I looked good in the weekend. I think he's got a bit more fight in him. Like he made a pretty bad defensive mistake against England, and if you just saw the turnaround and I think he caught. I can't remember who was in the corner. I remember it was the Balakoon tackle. But a key part of why Balakoon was able to hit to put I can't remember which English player it was, but it was a run. I don't think it was a Rundle.
Freeman, I think.
Was it Freeman? Yeah, it was Freeman. You're right, it was Freeman. But a key reason why he was able to put him in touch was because O'Brien turned back around, having made the mistake, and caught him just before that tackle. So, and I thought he was brilliant in the air. You know, I think Stockdale. I was really critical to Bielbury missed tackle, but I could see why you could mistime that one. I've been talked around a little bit by someone I respect on that one. But I still think you should have laid more on him, but that was a bad error. But it was the stuff in the air that really killed him, Will. And I think based on what O'Brien did in the air, I think he comes back in. I do. I think that's probably the real differentiator. I do think he looks dangerous. O'Brien's so quick, isn't he? We just don't have that many absolute speedsters, you know. So yeah, that's a tough call. I agree with you. It is really difficult for him that he came in the match that Ireland played pretty horrendous. But I think he contributed to it. Whereas if he didn't contribute much to it, I would have said, if he didn't contribute much to the bad performance, I would have been like, okay, he probably, give him another shot pretty quickly. But no, I'm not so sure I would do that. I think he stays out of the team for me.
Yeah, I suppose both wings were dropped after Paris. O'Brien came back in. Surprisingly, it must be said, in the 23 jersey. I don't think people were expecting that. And obviously, as the game unfolded with Lowe's injury, he got a shot very early doors and played really well. Rudd, is your sense that there could be a change in the left wing and Stockdale starts ahead of O'Brien? Because it would be kind of a bit odd to bring O'Brien in randomly at 23. He plays the full match almost and plays unbelievably well. And then it's like, actually, we'll go back to Stockdale. What's your reckoning there?
Yeah, my gut would be that it would be O'Brien. I saw a bit of training last week and they were swapping in and out. So that's why people are talking about it being a bit of a battle, because they obviously retained Stockdale for the weekend camp and didn't release him to Ulster. But, they spun the Aki, and the question, I suppose, is whether Aki comes onto the bench and whether Stockdale makes it onto the bench in that 23 shirt. It was Andrew Goodman who wanted the winger on the bench. I still don't quite understand why. It worked out really well. It's more of a Joe Schmidt call, really. Used to pick Felix Jones on the bench. I'm sure much to Luke's chagrin from time to time because of his left-footed kicking option. Stockdale's left foot is a weapon, but they don't need it as much because they've got Jamie Osborne, who has a brilliant left boot. So they have a left footer in that back line already. So even the fact that O'Brien isn't a naturally left-footed player means that they can probably get away with it. Him on left wing, and it worked so well having the two of them. They worked so well in tandem. It was exciting, it was thrilling. It's an area Wales went after last year, so I think that they will be tested aerially by this Welsh team, and Wales got some change in the game last year. We got to remember Wales pushed Ireland really close last year and thought they were onto a winner at times, so they will cause problems in some areas, and that back three will have to be ready for it. Maybe they're concerned about O'Brien's aerial positioning. It was a strange game in Twickenham. England didn't kick the ball anywhere near as much as we expected, so he probably got to play a running game. He might be tested more as a left winger positionally if from the start, and maybe that's what they're worried about. But I think you got to go with the guy who played well at Twickenham and back that.
Yeah.
Jeez, I don't ever remember getting beaten out by Felix Jones to the bench, but there you go. Jeez, I'm even more depressed about my own career now. But no, it's an interesting one. The one point I wanted to pick you up on was, and I said this before the game, Will, I still think something's happened with how South Africa have been picking their team, that people now feel like a back can't be a valuable addition to your bench. It's all of a sudden it's out of the game now. I do think that, having someone who's got serious pace when everyone's tired can be just as impactful as bringing on another heavy forward onto the pitch, if not more powerful, particularly if your guys haven't had a really, it hasn't been that taxing, you haven't had too many yellow cards, things like that. Bringing it back onto the pitch with fresh legs. I just want to say that I think the game has gone away from it so far now that
I just feel like you never see it. You never see it. You see 6-2. The centre has become very popular, certainly from an Irish perspective. In Andy Farrell's tenure, he's picked Bundy, Aki, or Henshaw a fair bit as 23. There's been other centres who've made that run. Like, what's your view on that? Like I don't feel like you ever see it really. That's why O'Brien being picked at 23 kind of jarred to the eye so much, because God, I wonder, is it to cover a back three injury? Is there a guy carrying a knock? And as you said, Lowe did get injured, but he wasn't carrying that. He just ended up tearing his groin. You mentioned Andrew Goodman. Was it like just a tactical thing that he wanted to potentially shake things up, as Luke said, bring on the pace of O'Brien? Or what's your sense of why he was picked?
Yeah, they didn't really go beyond that. I mean, they have done it from time to time. Just looking at the teams they've named, Jimmy O'Brien, Calvin Nash in kind of the less high-profile games in the last year. Osborne played in the 23 shirt a couple of times. Larmer's been there in this cycle, but it's been very rare. It's largely a centre. Earls would have played that role a fair bit in the previous cycle, but I think Farrell thinks that he can kind of negate the 6-2 split if he's got a player of the physical profile of a Robbie Henshaw or a Bundy Aki, so he can go 5-3. But effectively, you're bringing on an auxiliary flanker because those players are so powerful and add so much punch off the bench.
Yeah, like Bundy against Wales last year is the case in point. Obviously, Ringrose gets the 20-minute red card, and Bundy gave probably one of his best ever Ireland performances.
Yeah, and I think if Bundy gets the contract to go to the World Cup, that's going to be his role. It's going to be that number 23 shirt, just to come on for 25 minutes, half an hour of games and just bring them home and add that energy, because I don't think he's got 80 minutes in him anymore, and I'm not sure he'd even have 50 at test level. Maybe he'll throw that back in my face, and fair play to him if he does. But at the stage of a career he's at, I think that's where his value will be. And I understand them picking someone like that in that position, but the idea of bringing on someone with utter speed and who can thrive in chaos in the 20 minutes when the opposition are at their most tired, maybe that doesn't apply as much in the era of a 7-1 bench, but I still think there's value in it. I still think there's merit in someone who can come on and see the game, someone who's intelligent, who can see the game from the stand for that time and then see where the space is and then attack that space. That maybe is a way the game will move again. It's just, these things always come in cycles and trends. Like, it worked out at Twickenham. We never really saw how it was going to work in Twickenham. It worked out in Twickenham because James Lowe did his groin. So, O'Brien was thrown into it and it worked out really well. Like, Hansen's a player who could really thrive in that number 23 jersey. I mean, he could play 10 if you need him to. So, he could even do a 6-2 if you really wanted. So there's options, and it might just open them up to the idea again.
Yeah, because Ireland should be zagging when everyone's zigging or zigging when everyone's zagging, Luke. I take your point. Like South Africa had to do it one way because they have certain athletes that Ireland don't have, and pretty much no team has. But surely Ireland should be trying to carve out their own way of picking it. And to Rudd's point, Hansen is an interesting option there as a 23 with his versatility and stuff like that. But it is, I agree with you. You rarely see it anymore. And maybe, I don't know if the O'Brien one is maybe a kind of a sign that it might be coming back into vogue.
Yeah, I just think I've probably got caught myself with it, because when I think of it probably happens a lot with Leinster, kind of week to week, where you probably leave out someone where you're going, oh, you're leaving him out of the team. Probably Jack Conan or Ryan Baird over the last couple of years, where you're kind of saying, well, God, I got to get them in my team. Like, they'll be impactful when they come on. They're quick, they're powerful. They'll cause defenses problems, and I can see they can be valuable when a team is tired too. But I don't know. We've got some good pacey guys, some dangerous players who will get on the ball, who will cause damage, that are backs too. And I still think having the versatility. So you want to, like, a 9, particularly, always got to carry another 9, right? You just have to do that. And you probably have to carry someone who can play a 10. Although Ramos dropping in there, you mentioned Matt Hansen can kind of drop into. Maybe I'm kind of wed to the 9-10, kind of having to be on the bench, like, position specific. But I don't know. I just feel like having versatility there, having pace there, having a little bit of danger there when the game is in the balance, like, you can make a massive difference. It can really make a massive difference. You saw, like, particularly, right, we're probably only thinking the last couple of years about the set piece, and when teams are tired, bringing on that kind of big powerful guys onto the bench to either compete with South Africa or to take out a team that doesn't have as much resources as us, right? But you see what happens when you lose the aerial battle. Like, England lost that aerial battle. I thought that was a massive part of the mental game that we probably didn't talk about. We did talk about it, but we talked about kind of George Ford's kicks and some of the penalties close to the line, kind of, and how disheartened they looked after that. But I thought what really did contribute to it as well was how Ireland cleaned them out in the air. Like, the massive part of the game. And I think that, having someone valuable on the back three who's a specialist who can go up there and do that and who has pace, I definitely feel there's value in it. We said it before the kickoff, or before the match. I said it before the week of the England game that it was nice to see a third back on the bench, because the back can still change a game. And I think it probably didn't see it kind of panning out that way because he came on so early. But I still think he had an impact, and he was able to change it up, and he gave them a different pictures, and he was really good in the air, and it caused consternation in the English defence and really lifted the Irish spirit. So. It's a good point. I think it's an interesting topic, isn't it? I mean, I wonder will that develop over time.
I'm interested though to see how they would have used him if Lowe hadn't got injured. So say if the back line are fit and there's no injuries, would he have just sat on the bench all game? Would they have brought him on for Balogun after 60? Because he's not a left wing traditionally. So, like, I'm curious. We never got the answer to the question as to how they would have used him. Obviously, he was very impactful. All the things you would like to have seen, say, in an impact sub role from the start because of Lowe's injury, but it's kind of an unknowable question given how Lowe got injured so early. But yeah, it would have been intriguing to see how they would have used him. Ruud, you obviously were out at Ireland camp today, the start of Wales week. Like, what's kind of the narrative? What's the scene setting that was going on there? Like, what was kind of being spoken about out there today?
Yeah, I think we in the media are probably still basking a little bit in the glow of the England game, and they're trying to move us on and not trying to look forward rather than back. But you're trying to understand today kind of what their analysis of the England game was, how much are, and I get the sense that they're not completely sold. Obviously, the scoreline's brilliant, but they're realistic about the fact that England were pretty poor on the day. That they can't be giving opposition teams 12 entries into their 22 and be like their goal line defense was unbelievable over in Twickenham. But you can't be doing that against good teams because they're going to take their chances. I think they need to get I think they know that they won't need to get to that level really to beat Wales, but I think they've been striving towards consistency, and they haven't got it in the last 18 months really. So their challenge now is to back it up with a really strong. I think the word Paul O'Connor used was relentless. He wants to see like that relentless attacking approach, that relentless approach to the breakdown that they had. Like that was the best breakdown performance in ages. They need to take Wales out of the equation. They need to go out and play their own style, get those players that we've talked about, their hands on the ball, and kind of just take Wales out of the equation completely and have a really resounding, positive, convincing performance at home to back up that really historic and just exciting and thrilling away game that got everyone back on side. So I think they're realistic. They're not, well, they're most of them are on message saying they're not thinking about a Triple Crown, although Jamie Osborne did say, oh no, we're talking about a Triple Crown. So I think he must have missed the briefing with the media officer before he came in, but I think Farrell will frame it that way. It's Gibson Park's 50th on Friday, so I think Farrell's really good at kind of making those kind of things really special and trying, make a performance around that. And I think they all respect him so highly that they'll kind of lift it for him. So yeah, I think there's an element of bringing everyone back down to earth, but also saying you've hit a level there. That's the level we expect from you. Let's go and achieve that level again.
Yeah, Luke, that's my sense of it. Rudd's very last thing he said there. Like, obviously, Ireland are massive favourites. I expect them to beat Wales, kind of no matter what in some ways. But I'm very fascinated to see like how close they can get to the Twickenham performance, because like literally the week before against Italy was one of the poorer performances we've seen from Ireland in a long time, and that's saying something considering we felt that they haven't been at their best for maybe 18 months. So I think it is a really important two games to show that like that England game wasn't just a one-off kind of a classic. The English, let's get up for them and just have a great game, and they need to play like pretty similarly well this Friday night, or the question will just return as to whether this team were just capable of one kind of off performance and they actually still are maybe declining. So I think it's important that they back up last week and look kind of similarly good. I don't know what your sense is of that.
No, I think so. Really important. I'd like to see, because there's a little bit of pressure off this week. So this is going to be mentally more challenging for them. Can they remain as focused on the key areas that really help them through the English game? I'm glad Rhodes mentioned the rucking. I'd add, I think they've got to kick brilliantly and chase brilliantly again. I think that's really important. Set piece goes without saying, to be honest with you. But I would like to see them maybe do a little bit better at scrum time, maybe. But alongside the breakdown, what I also felt was really kind of a bit of a reversion to when Ireland were playing great was the ball handling amongst the forwards, guys. That was totally different. When Ireland play well, they have some seriously good ball handlers in there, and they had literally gone away from that, and they had fallen in love with going out the back to the 10 all the time as well. I really liked that Jack Crowley and some of the other backs who were sitting in behind at times, just let the forwards play. Let them do the little tip-on passes. Let them be a little bit creative in there. It's hard to not get the ball in your hands as a 10. You like to see it. You like to see that pass go across. You like to see the skip passes. That all feels good, but it's not as effective. You need to be direct. You need to get gain lines in there. You need to keep them honest in the tight. That's what opens up teams defensively. And if you marry that with good, quick ball at the ruck and good attention there in terms of getting ball placement, Gibson Park will run amok. He's a top-class player when they got good front football. He's got clean ball to work with. As a matter of fact, most nines look pretty good when that's the case. And as a result, generally the team looks pretty good. Everything's easier when you're doing those things. So that's another area that, we probably haven't talked about as much, but I think it's really important for this team that they do that well and they're really accurate. I mean, a big problem with France is that like the backs weren't great, but none of the forwards could hang on to the ball. You know what I mean? We never even got to see the attack because they never got past one phase or two phases. So there's big growth in that part of the game, and it's a really important part of the game. Really important against Wales, because I think they'll try and make it a dogfight in there. So can they refocus? Do they know why? I'm sure they've dissected the game, but do they really know what the big pillars of the performance were? My sense is with the people in the room and how they think about just, particularly I would obviously know how Paulie, Goody and Sexto, and probably Foggs now, not as much anymore, but I probably know how they think about the game, less so Farrell. But my sense is he'd be, if he's hiring all these people, he probably sees it's pretty similar. Focus on the simple things, the big pillars in the game. The rest will look after itself. He's got enough good players in the pitch who are, I think, come into a little bit of form that they should be able to deliver when the opportunity presents itself. But how you get to the opportunity, the path there, the big pillars. So focus on those things. I think they'll do it. I think they will do it. I'm feeling pretty confident about, where the team is at now. But there's no doubt this is going to be a mental challenge on the weekend.
Just a word on Wales, Rudd. Obviously, haven't won a Six Nations game since 2023. I think the round 4, 2023, I think, against Italy. It was actually the weekend Ireland beat Scotland with all those injuries I referred to earlier. So you're going back a long, long time now. Their first round against England was atrocious. I know they're down some bodies and aren't in a good place, but they just played absolutely terribly. Like, their discipline was shocking, their accuracy was non-existent. Like against France, second round, France just outclassed them. Like, Wales really couldn't lay a glove on them. But the England game, I thought, was worrying. And then obviously last week they fronted up. They should have probably won the game. They were a little unlucky, kind of similar to the Ireland game in round 3 last year. Like, they brought it in front of their home fans and gave them something to shout about. What's your sense of how they might pitch up this weekend? They didn't really back up that close game against Ireland last year. I know they were kind of close to Scotland on the scoreboard in round 4, but they scored like 3 tries in the last 10 minutes to make it look close. They were down by like 30 points for most of that game. So what Wales do you think we'll see on Friday night?
Well, I think they're improving, but they're coming from a very, very low base. Like that, you're right. That Twickenham performance was atrocious and so far below the level that it was kind of scary. It was one of those moments where I got like, if there was a relegation in this thing, Wales wouldn't be getting back. You know that they'd fallen so far off the level. And against France, they showed signs, and then Scotland, you know, there was elements where they look like they're putting something together. And we've got to remember that Steve Tanley's only recently in, like that Ireland cheer Max Sherratt was just taken over from Warren Gatland. I think it's really important from an Irish point of view that they just experienced a good day in an Ireland jersey again and felt good about themselves, and that should flow into another good performance. And even if it's not near the heights of Twickenham, you know, Ireland don't need to be at their best to beat this Wales team right now. They'll take positives from the fact that the regions had a good weekend, especially two regions beat two Irish teams. That's, you know, they were missing their Welsh players as well. That's going to give them a bit of confidence. I think they're closing the gap, but the gap is enormous, and they it's more, I'd say, about delivering on certain pillars of the game, as Luke was talking about. I'd say they're not traveling looking for a win necessarily. I'd say they're looking to win a certain amount of the battles within the game, to keep it tight, make it into a battle, frustrate Ireland, and then go into the last 20 minutes with a chance. I think that would be a pretty good day for them. But what Ireland, as I said earlier, they need to do is take them out of the equation. They need to be ruthless. They can't go getting anyone sent off like they did last year. They've got to be ready for it, because Wales delivered at the scrum last year. They out-scrummed Ireland. They were really good in the air. They had a really good back three that day. Ireland struggled with them in that area. I don't think that's going to happen again. They found one or two players. Their ball carrying's improved. So if they start to win collisions and if Ireland aren't at the right place, then there'll be chinks of light. But it's hard to see at this point.
Yeah. For me, from a Welsh perspective, it's kind of just about keeping a bit of momentum ahead of the Italy game in the final week when you're at home and you could really have a crack at getting that win. Like if they could come out of Dublin with some of the momentum from the Scotland game intact, I think that would be a good outing. Like I'm not trying to set Ireland up to, for a big banana skin by talking Wales down so much, but just from what I've seen, I just really would be surprised if it was particularly close, considering where they're at. But we'll see how it plays out on Friday night. Just before we finish off, guys, don't have super long to talk about England-Italy, but Luke, it's I've never looked forward to an Italy-England game ever, I don't think, until this Saturday. Rome, 4:40. There really is a sense that this could be the time Italy get their first ever victory. Like England have lost 2 in a row. Like there was news in the English press today that Borthwick is making, I think, 9 changes to the team that lost to Ireland. I don't know if it's panicking or if he's being ruthless, but George Ford is being dropped, Freddie Stewart's being dropped, Henry Pollock's being dropped, 2 new wings in, Freeman back into the centre. We were talking about Farrell trying to get jolts the other week. This is Borthwick pulling every lever he has pretty much. But I could really see Italy winning this game. Is that like a step too far in what you've seen from England? Is that like too far down the pole of them falling, or do you think it's a live option?
I think it's a live option. Italy look good to me. I thought Ireland were very lucky to come away unscathed at home to Italy. I mean, they look dangerous. Scrum's a problem, although I think England might deal with that a bit better. Line-out was pretty good too, but they got threat. They have threat. I mean, that disallowed try shook me to the core, because I was like, I didn't see us come up with a move like that against them all day, really. I mean, even it was a lovely finish by Balogun and a lovely bit of play by McCluskey for both tries, I suppose. But for that overhand, the kind of NFL type throw was a beautiful bit of play, but it was kind of unstructured. Do you know what I mean? Like Italy had a few moments where I was like, wow, that looked really good. Looked very tidy. They look organised. They know what they're doing. And defensively, they're not as easy as they were to break down. If you have kind of concerted pressure against them, they can hang in there from time to time. So I think they'll be buzzing for this game. I think they will think this, exactly as you said, their first chance to beat them. And yeah, I think it's definitely a live option. 100% it is. I think I think they'll believe it, which is probably the first step to actually going and achieving it, I think, isn't it? Is that you actually do think you can do it, and you can figure out ways where you go, well, actually, how good are they there? And England, as you said, will likely chop and change a lot. So will they have that kind of free-flowing attack? I doubt it. I think it could be stop-starty, it could be nervy. I think one of those games where they'll have to get all their kicks, they'll have to scrap in the air, and they'll have to hang in there at scrum time. to win it. I don't see a cricket score. Like, I don't see one of those big, massive kind of comeback wins for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, I can't wait to watch that one. I agree with you. I really can't wait to watch this match. I think it's actually a massive match for Borthwick.
Yeah.
Huge pressure on him. Massive pressure on him.
Yeah, because they go to Paris and then they go to Johannesburg in their first Nations Cup game. So if they don't win at the weekend, if they lose their first time ever against Italy, they're likely to lose the next two against France and South Africa as well. I actually think Italy will win on Saturday. I think they would have taken huge confidence from the Ireland game. I think I know they lost 33-8 to France, but I don't think that was reflective of the performance of Italy. I thought they were better than that scoreline suggested as well. So even though they didn't win either game, kind of like the point I made about Wales a second ago, I think they can actually take some momentum into the break week and into this big home game against England. Rudd, how do you think it'll go? Like, for me, I get the sense, it's funny, like the reports I read out about the team, like, say that the team was built on George Ford, this Borthwick ball, and now he's jettisoning his guy who was kind of getting all the praise for being the playmaker and the guy who runs the week and the adult in the room, and now all of a sudden that does strike me as panicking. Like, it's such a seismic change. There's a couple of injuries there as well, but for me it feels like I never really thought England were as good as their record showed. They said they were, and after the two defeats, I think the wheels could be coming off. I think they'll lose this weekend. What do you reckon?
England, they're very good at getting their message at what they're doing, and we heard a lot in the first couple of weeks, especially after the Scotland game, about how Borthwick doesn't want this doom loop. Was it a doom loop or a doom cycle where he didn't want it? If you lose a game, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, that everything you've been doing previously is all bad. And then lose a second game, and he's going to change every one of his backs and make all those changes you're talking about. So he's lost confidence in his methods. He's espousing this idea that you need consistency. Don't just become a bad team because we've lost one game. Well, have you become a bad team? You've lost two games. The nature of the defeat to Ireland suggests that maybe you have, but that's your team. Like, you're taking them off in the first half. You're changing your entire back line mid-tournament. Doesn't lead to a coach who's in control. It's a muddled coaching ticket. Got 3 defence coaches. I've heard of them, but they're going to be making more changes to their coaching ticket post this window. What is it, 18 months out from World Cup? That doesn't speak to a very, it's a coaching ticket that's already changed within this World Cup cycle. And suddenly the chariot that was rolling towards the World Cup looked nice. The wheels are starting to fall off. And if they lose in Rome, with Paris to come, they have a week together in camp. I think they're staying either in France or Italy in between the two games. They're not going back to England, which sounded like a lovely idea when he was telling everyone to book their Eurostar tickets to go to see Grand Slam. Well, they might go see a Grand Slam, all right, but it won't be theirs. And for the team, that's miserable. If they've just lost 3 games in a row and to stay together for a week and try and pick over the bones of it all, it just becomes a really difficult place to be. And it's a difficult place for Borthwick, who was never really convinced. When they've got 12 in a row, you're thinking this guy's on something, but it's come apart so quickly. And they were so desperate against Ireland. Whatever about the Scotland game, to go out at home and play like that and to make so many errors and cough up 40-metre line breaks on first phase, like stuff just don't see in international rugby anymore. Like, that's alarming. And it's absolutely, because Italy are a good attacking side. Whether they can live with them for 80 minutes, they look like they can. It doesn't look like England are hard to live with right now, but they surely blood in the water from an Italian point of view. It's whether they have the composure to go out with a bit of expectation on their shoulder and deliver a performance. It'd be amazing for the tournament if Italy got their first win over England. What a message that would send about where Italian rugby's at. And you 20s, they've got good players coming through as well, so they're going to be around for the next couple of years. So obviously the Ireland-Wales game is on Friday night and Friday Six Nations. I'm not sure how much I love it, but considering the Saturday we've been left with, I'll take it just this once. That's all we have time for on this week's episode of the Left Wing Podcast, sponsored by Energy. The good news is that we hit all Six Nations teams, just as I teed up at the start. The bad news is we didn't get to squeeze in any of the URC talking points I wanted to. Unfortunately, we've just run out of time. But potentially I'll try to sneak in an extra podcast into the feed later in the week to touch on some of the provincial stuff, because I think there's some really interesting things happen over the weekend. And obviously it'll go back into hibernation for another 2 or 3 weeks before we kick back into the club season. But for now, big thanks to Rudd for joining me. I know he's had a very busy day today. Big thanks for Luke. I know he's probably tired from all the skiing. Until next time, lads, thanks so much for joining me. Goodbye.